I never thought that moving back to my childhood home would lead to the strangest battle of my life. My name is Michael Sullivan, and until 6 months ago, I was living a comfortable life as an environmental lawyer in Boston. Then my father passed away unexpectedly, leaving me the family home in Meadowbrook Estates, a once modest neighborhood that had transformed into an upscale community during my 20-year absence. The property had been in our family for 4 generations, with the crown jewel being a magnificent white oak that my great-grandfather planted in 1922 to celebrate the birth of his first child, my grandfather. That tree had witnessed every significant Sullivan family milestone for a century. My first week back was spent reconnecting with old neighbors and settling into a house filled with memories. The oak stood majestically in the corner of the front yard, its massive canopy providing shade over nearly half the property. Its trunk was so wide that as children, my sister and I couldn't join hands around it when we played Ring Around the Rosie. I'd climbed its sturdy branches throughout my childhood, and later, my father had hung a swing from one of its strongest limbs for my nephew to enjoy during summer visits. The tree was more than just a plant. It was a living family monument. I should have realized trouble was brewing when Vanessa Harrington, president of the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, stopped by with what she called a welcome basket 3 days after I moved in. Vanessa was the epitome of suburban pretension, perfectly highlighted blonde hair arranged in an elaborate updo, manicured nails painted an aggressive shade of red, and clothing that seemed designed to showcase every designer label simultaneously. The basket contained a homeowner's manual, a schedule of approved landscaping services, and a stack of violations that had apparently accumulated during my father's final illness. "We're simply thrilled to have new blood in the neighborhood," Vanessa said, her voice carrying the artificial sweetness of aspartame. She gestured toward my father's somewhat overgrown garden with a grimace barely disguised as a smile. "Though we do hope you'll address these minor compliance issues promptly. High standards are what keep Meadowbrook Estates so desirable." Her gaze drifted to the oak tree, and something in her expression made my lawyer instincts flare. "That tree, in particular, is becoming problematic. Several residents have complained about the autumn leaves. Perhaps we could schedule its removal next month. I have a wonderful landscaper who offers special rates to association members." I politely but firmly explained that the tree was staying. It's over 100 years old and has significant historical and personal value. Besides, I'm quite sure it predates any homeowners association rules. I tried to keep my tone friendly, remembering my father's advice about catching more flies with honey. Vanessa's smile remained fixed, but her eyes hardened like gemstones. "Well, we all have to make sacrifices for the greater good of the community," she said with a tight laugh. "I'm sure once you've reacclimated to neighborhood living, you'll understand our standards better. The manual explains everything." She tapped the thick binder with one long fingernail. "Do review it carefully. The fines for non-compliance can be quite substantial." After she left, I flipped through the manual, my concern growing with each page. The rules were absurdly restrictive: specific paint colors, approved plant species, even regulations about when holiday decorations could be displayed and removed. Most concerning was a section about non-conforming vegetation that gave the HOA broad powers to demand removal of plants they deemed problematic. I immediately checked the dates and was relieved to confirm my suspicion the HOA had been established in 1998, 76 years after my tree was planted. Legally, I knew the tree should be grandfathered in and exempt from their rules. The next morning, I found my first official violation notice taped to my door. Unapproved tree causing excessive debris and visibility issues for neighboring properties. Action required within 30 days. The fine listed was $2,500, with an additional $100 added for each day of non-compliance after the deadline. My blood boiled as I read it, but I reminded myself that I had the law on my side. As an environmental attorney specializing in land use rights, I knew exactly how to handle this situation, or so I thought. I called the number listed on the violation and reached Vanessa's personal assistant, who informed me that Mrs. Harrington was extremely busy with community affairs, but could fit me in for a 15-minute meeting the following week. Not willing to wait, I decided to research the HOA's legal standing while preparing my defense. I spent the afternoon in the county records office, pulling the original property deeds, subdivision maps, and HOA formation documents. What I discovered confirmed my position. Not only was my tree exempt from their regulations due to its age, but the original neighborhood covenant explicitly protected heritage trees as living landmarks of community significance. Armed with this information, I drafted a formal response to the violation notice, citing the relevant legal precedents and including copies of the original documents. I hand-delivered it to Vanessa's Tudor-style mansion at the end of the cul-de-sac, making sure to be polite to the uniformed housekeeper who answered the door. 2 days later, I received another notice. This one marked final warning in aggressive red letters. The new document ignored all my legal points and simply restated that the tree must be removed, with the fine now increased to $5,000. It was time to seek allies. My first stop was the house next door, where Eleanor Jenkins had lived for over 50 years. Eleanor was a spry, 82-year-old widow with a sharp mind and sharper tongue, who had been my father's friend since they were both young parents in the neighborhood. She invited me in for coffee and listened intently as I explained my situation. "That Vanessa is a menace," Eleanor declared, slamming her mug down with surprising force. "She's been trying to remake this neighborhood in her image since she moved in 6 years ago. Your tree isn't the first thing she's targeted. Last year, she forced the Rodriguez family to remove their beautiful rose garden because it wasn't on the approved plant list. And poor Bill Hansen had to paint his front door 3 times before she approved the shade of blue." She leaned forward conspiratorially. "But here's something interesting. She's particularly aggressive about trees. Got the Wilsons' maple cut down, the Thompsons' pine, and now she's after your oak. It's odd, don't you think?" Eleanor's observations intrigued me. "Do you know why she's so focused on removing trees specifically?" I asked. Eleanor nodded, her eyes twinkling with the joy of sharing neighborhood gossip. "Her husband's company, Harrington Development, bought the vacant land behind the neighborhood last year. Rumor has it they're planning a high-end housing development, but they're having trouble getting permits because of water runoff concerns. The more trees removed from existing properties, the easier it would be to argue that their development wouldn't significantly change the area's drainage patterns." This information put everything in a new light. Vanessa's crusade against my oak wasn't just about aesthetic preferences or power. It was potentially part of a calculated business strategy. I thanked Eleanor for the insight and promised to keep her updated. As I was leaving, she mentioned that several other neighbors were also unhappy with Vanessa's reign, but were too intimidated to speak out. Over the next week, I met discreetly with other homeowners, documenting their experiences with the HOA under Vanessa's leadership. The pattern was clear excessive fines, selective enforcement of rules, and an atmosphere of intimidation. Jacob Chen, a retired civil engineer who'd lived in Meadowbrook for 30 years, provided particularly valuable information. "The HOA board hasn't held a proper election in 3 years, he told me. "Vanessa keeps postponing it for administrative reasons, and the financial reports are suspiciously vague about where all our dues are going." While building my case against the HOA, I also took precautionary measures to protect my tree. I hired an arborist to document its health and historical significance, installed security cameras with a clear view of the front yard, and placed protected heritage tree signs that cited the relevant legal statutes. I felt reasonably confident that these steps would deter any immediate action while I pursued proper legal channels. I was wrong. The sound that woke me was subtle at first, a mechanical whirring that my sleep-fogged brain couldn't immediately identify. It was just after 2 in the morning, according to the glowing digits of my bedside clock. I might have rolled over and gone back to sleep if not for the sudden, unmistakable crack of wood splitting. I bolted upright, instantly alert as adrenaline flooded my system. Another crack, followed by the revving of what I now recognized as a chainsaw, sent me racing downstairs in my pajamas and bare feet. The scene in my front yard was illuminated by harsh portable floodlights that cast everything in surreal shadows. 3 men in work clothes were attacking my oak with professional equipment, one operating a chainsaw, the others guiding the falling branches with ropes. Standing to the side, directing the operation like a conductor with her orchestra, was Vanessa Harrington, dressed incongruously in designer activewear and glittering jewelry despite the hour. "Stop!" I shouted, running toward them. "What the hell do you think you're doing? This is private property." The workers paused, looking uncertainly between me and Vanessa. One of the larger branches had already been removed, leaving a gaping wound in the tree's once perfect canopy. Vanessa stepped forward, her expression a mixture of surprise and annoyance at being caught. She quickly composed herself, producing a document from her expensive leather portfolio. "We're conducting emergency removal of a hazardous tree under Section 8.3 of the HOA bylaws," she stated with practiced authority. "This oak has been deemed structurally unsound and poses an immediate danger to surrounding properties." "That's absolute nonsense," I shot back, anger making my voice shake. "This tree was professionally assessed just last week and certified completely healthy. This is criminal trespassing and destruction of property." I pulled out my phone and started recording, while simultaneously dialing 911. "The police are on their way." Vanessa's confident facade cracked slightly. She snapped her fingers at the workers. "Continue. We have proper authorization." When they hesitated, she added, "I personally guarantee your payment and legal protection." One of the workers, an older man with a weathered face, shook his head. "Sorry, ma'am. We were told this was an authorized removal with the owner's consent. I'm not risking my license for a property dispute." He signaled to his colleagues, and they began packing up their equipment. "You can't just stop!" Vanessa's voice rose to a near shriek. "Do you know who I am? I'll have your business shut down by morning." The worker regarded her calmly. "With all due respect, ma'am, I've been in this business 30 years, seen plenty of HOA disputes. I'm not getting in the middle of this one." They quickly loaded their truck and departed, leaving Vanessa and me alone in the harsh artificial light. "This isn't over, Sullivan," she hissed, her carefully maintained appearance now marred by fury. "That tree is coming down one way or another. No single resident gets to hold back progress for the entire community. Progress is that what you call destroying a century-old tree in the middle of the night, without permits or permission." I kept my phone recording as she stormed to her luxury SUV parked down the street. "The HOA doesn't have the authority you think it does, Vanessa, and you've just crossed the line from civil disagreement into criminal behavior." The police arrived 15 minutes later, by which time I'd documented the damage and secured statements from several neighbors who had been awakened by the commotion. Eleanor had come outside in her bathrobe and slippers, outraged on my behalf. "I've lived here 53 years and never seen such a disgraceful abuse of power," she told the responding officers. "That tree is older than I am, and this woman thinks she can just destroy it because of some made-up emergency." Officer Ramirez, a thorough professional, took detailed statements and photographs. "We'll need to see the HOA documentation she was claiming gave her this authority," he explained. "Based on what I'm seeing, this appears to be criminal trespassing and attempted destruction of property, but we'll need to investigate the legal standing of both parties." The next day was a whirlwind of activity. I filed for an emergency injunction against the HOA to prevent any further attempts to remove my tree. I also formally reported the incident to the district attorney's office, submitting the video evidence and witness statements. The arborist returned to assess the damage and provide an estimate for healing treatment to save the injured tree. The cost would be substantial, over $6,000, but he believed the oak could recover if properly cared for. Word of the midnight attack spread quickly through the neighborhood. By afternoon, a small crowd had gathered in my front yard, expressing support and sharing their own stories of intimidation by Vanessa and the HOA. Jacob Chen brought copies of the HOA financial records he'd been collecting, showing questionable expenditures and potential misappropriation of funds. Another neighbor, Maria Rodriguez, revealed that her family had been threatened with liens against their property when they challenged a dubious violation notice last year. "We need to organize," I told the assembled neighbors. "This isn't just about my tree, it's about whether we let our community be controlled through intimidation and selective enforcement." By evening, we had formed the Meadowbrook Homeowners' Rights Coalition, with a plan to challenge the current HOA leadership and demand a full audit of their practices. The next morning, I received an unexpected visitor. Thomas Harrington, Vanessa's husband, arrived in a sleek German sedan and asked to speak with me privately. Thomas was everything his wife was not understated, calm, and seemingly reasonable in his approach. He expressed what sounded like sincere regret for the misunderstanding about my tree. "I had no idea Vanessa had taken things to this extreme," he said, looking genuinely uncomfortable. "I want to offer compensation for the damage and assure you that nothing like this will happen again." He slid a folder across the table containing an offer letter for $10,000 to cover the arborist's treatment and any inconvenience caused. "And in exchange," I asked, already knowing the answer, "we'd appreciate your discretion in resolving this matter." Thomas replied smoothly. "Drop the police report, halt any legal action against the HOA, and help us move forward as good neighbors. Vanessa is under a lot of pressure with the new development project, and she sometimes gets overzealous in her methods." I studied the man carefully. "Your wife committed criminal trespass and attempted to destroy a 100-year-old protected tree. She's been systematically abusing her position to intimidate residents and possibly misappropriating HOA funds. Do you really think $10,000 makes that go away?" Thomas's pleasant expression tightened. "I understand you're upset, but consider the practical aspects. Legal battles are expensive and time-consuming. We're prepared to be very generous to avoid that path." He paused. "We could also discuss potential employment opportunities with Harrington Development for someone with your environmental law expertise. Your insights would be valuable for our upcoming projects." The attempted bribe was the final confirmation I needed of how the Harringtons operated. I stood up, signaling the end of our conversation. "I'll see this through proper legal channels, Mr. Harrington, and I suggest you prepare for significant changes to how the HOA has been operating." The next few weeks were challenging. I balanced my remote legal work with building our case against the HOA. Vanessa launched a counteroffensive, sending violation notices to every member of our coalition and calling an emergency HOA meeting where she characterized us as radical elements threatening property values. She also filed a civil suit claiming my tree was causing foundation damage to neighboring properties, a claim quickly disproven by independent structural assessments. The turning point came when our coalition's investigation uncovered the real reason behind Vanessa's desperate attempts to remove neighborhood trees. Harrington Development had not simply purchased the land behind Meadowbrook Estates, they had applied for a zoning variance that would allow them to build at 3 times the normally permitted density. Their environmental impact statement claimed the area already had minimal natural tree coverage, making their development's effect on water runoff negligible. Every mature tree removed from existing properties strengthened their argument. We took this information to the county zoning board and the local press. The resulting story, HOA president's midnight tree attack linked to husband's development scheme, ran on the front page of the local paper and was picked up by regional news outlets. The public attention forced the district attorney's office to fast-track their investigation. And within days, Vanessa was facing multiple charges: criminal trespassing, attempted destruction of property, filing false HOA documents, and misappropriation of association funds. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Our coalition had uncovered years of financial irregularities, including HOA funds being used for personal expenses and consulting fees paid to shell companies owned by the Harringtons. The tree removal company confirmed they had been told they were responding to an emergency situation with the owner's consent, with documentation forged on HOA letterhead. Most damning was the recovery of text messages between Vanessa and Thomas discussing their strategy to clear obstacles for the development project, with specific mention of my oak tree as a priority target. While awaiting trial, Vanessa was removed from the HOA board. An emergency election installed a new leadership team committed to transparency and reasonable enforcement. The first act of the new board was to adopt a heritage tree protection clause, ensuring that mature trees throughout the neighborhood would be recognized as community assets rather than nuisances. The criminal proceedings moved swiftly, facing overwhelming evidence and the prospect of multiple felony convictions. Vanessa agreed to a plea deal that included financial restitution, community service, and most satisfyingly felony charges that would permanently remain on her record. Harrington Development's zoning variance was denied, and their subsequent scaled-back proposal included extensive tree preservation requirements and stormwater management systems. As for my oak tree, the arborist's treatment was successful. Though it would bear the scars of Vanessa's attack, the tree would survive and continue to grow for hopefully another century. I decided to remain in my family home, finding unexpected fulfillment in reconnecting with my roots and helping rebuild a community where neighbors looked out for each other instead of policing trivial violations. 6 months after that midnight chainsaw attack, we held a neighborhood celebration under the spreading branches of my oak tree. Children played on the new swing I had installed. Families shared potluck dishes on picnic blankets, and Eleanor regaled younger residents with stories of the neighborhood's history. Thomas Harrington had sold their mansion and relocated to another state following his wife's conviction and the collapse of their development plans. As twilight fell and lanterns were lit among the branches, Jacob Chen raised a toast. "To the tree that saved our neighborhood," he said, his glass held high. Everyone cheered, looking up at the magnificent oak whose branches now stretched protectively over us all. I often think about how differently things might have turned out if Vanessa had succeeded that night. Instead of dividing us, her midnight attack on my tree had united the community in ways no one could have predicted. The oak that my great-grandfather planted had once again witnessed a significant Sullivan family milestone, not just the defense of our property rights, but the renewal of what makes a neighborhood truly valuable: mutual respect, shared history, and the understanding that some things are worth fighting to preserve. The Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association still exists, but it now operates with transparency and genuine community input. The excessive rules have been pruned back like unhealthy branches, leaving a framework that supports the neighborhood rather than constraining it. As for me, I found a new direction for my legal career, specializing in helping homeowners stand up to HOA overreach. It turns out there's no shortage of Vanessas in the world of suburban governance, but with proper knowledge and community solidarity, there's also no shortage of ways to ensure they face the consequences of their actions. And every morning, I wake up to the sight of that magnificent oak tree outside my window, scarred but standing, a living reminder that some roots run too deep to be easily severed, and that with enough care and determination, even the most grievous wounds can heal.